Good morning, South Africa, and welcome to True State of the Nation, where we take an honest look at what is happening in the country. So I'm back after a short break, and a lot has happened in the last 2 weeks, most of it very concerning. I had to write this episode on my phone because we are once again experiencing high stages of load shedding. Part of Johannesburg has suffered long water outages because of the failure to do proper maintenance on the water infrastructure. And last week, a massive explosion devastated the Joburg CBD. The post office has been placed in business rescue, and the SABC is headed in the same direction. And nobody knows what is really happening with the SAA deal. Meanwhile, the police have been unable to stop criminals from brazenly burning trucks on our country's main highways. But now, the people responsible for all of these failures would like to give themselves more centralized power, along with another massive administrative task they are clearly unable to manage. I'm talking about the implementation of Aarto, the administrative adjudication of road traffic offences. The Constitutional Court has overruled a previous judgment that said Aarto was unconstitutional, paving the way for the ANC to implement it. Now, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Judge Zondo. I believe he is a man of integrity who truly has the best interest of the country at heart. That said, he is bound by the law, and so just because something is ruled constitutional doesn't mean it is a good idea. The ANC's obsession with centralized power and absolute control is unjustifiable. They cannot manage the power they already have, and yet they are constantly insisting on gathering more. And as with the ANC's other plans for centralized power, like the NHI, Aarto will be a disaster. It will throw billions of our taxes down the ANC drain of corruption and incompetence, make life unnecessarily difficult for ordinary South Africans, and do nothing to address the actual problem. Yes, our roads are dangerous, and a lot of people die unnecessarily because of bad driving. So I don't have a problem with attempts to reduce the death on our roads, not at all. My concern is implementation. The government cannot or will not properly enforce the rules under the current system, but instead of addressing their own shortcomings, their solution is to implement a much more complicated system. One of the biggest problems with the ANC is their insistence on trying to fly before they've even mastered crawling. For example, they have destroyed public health care, but instead of fixing it, their solution is to implement the overly ambitious NHI. And Aarto will be the same thing. So I think there are 3 things the government would need to fix before they could properly implement a system like Aarto. Number 1, government administration. The ANC government cannot even get basic administrative tasks right. So how do they expect to efficiently and effectively administer a system that keeps track of the demerit points of every driver in South Africa? And that without turning this into another opportunity for massive corruption. These are the same people who cannot properly administer the issuing and printing of driver's license cards. But now they want to implement a system to add demerits to those cards. It's simply nonsensical. First get the basics right, and then perhaps you will earn the support and trust of the people. Government administration will only improve once ANC cadre deployment is stopped, merit-based appointment is instituted, and corruption is rooted out of the government. Until then, any new system is doomed to fail. Number 2, police corruption. I know there are many dedicated, professional and honest police officers in our country. The problem is that there are also a lot of scoundrels in uniform. So if the government wants Aarto to be a legitimate system, it needs to be implemented by a legitimate law enforcement sector, not thugs in uniforms. A few years ago, I took a trip from Pretoria to Rustenburg, and on my return, I was immediately pulled over by a police officer as soon as I got onto the highway. The officer told me that he was going to fine me for not wearing my seatbelt. I admitted that I hadn't put my seatbelt on and accepted the ticket. But then the officer told me that if I bought him lunch, he would forget the ticket. I refused to pay the bribe and said I would rather take the fine. The angry officer sent me on my way without the ticket. Clearly, He had no interest in enforcing the law or making the roads safer. He was only interested in his own personal enrichment. I was still thinking about what had just happened when not even 10 kilometers later, another police officer pulled me over. This time I had done nothing wrong, but I was told that I was speeding and was going to get a 2,000 Rand fine. I asked to see the reading from the speed trap because I knew I had not been speeding. But the officer told me that he didn't have a speed trap. He had instead judged my speed by eye. I didn't want to get into an argument with a police officer, so I told him that I would accept the fine, but that I would challenge it in court. To my absolute disbelief, he then used the exact same words his colleague had used not 10 minutes earlier, and told me that the ticket would disappear if I bought him lunch. Again I refused the bribe, and again I was sent on my way without the fine. Now many of us have experienced similar behavior from the police, the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law, using their power for personal enrichment. So before Aarto can be implemented effectively, the government must first deal with corruption within law enforcement, before they set the corrupt officials loose on the public. The threat of paying a fine is one thing, but when police can threaten you with losing your license, they have a lot more leverage to solicit bribes. Number 3. Address public transport. The third thing the government needs to fix before implementing Aarto is the two-tier road rule system. By that I mean that currently there are two sets of road rules, one for citizens and the other for taxi drivers. Taxi drivers contribute massively to the deaths on our road, and yet they act as though the road rules simply don't apply to them. They drive however they want, with absolute impunity. So if the aim of Aarto is to reduce road carnage, then taxi drivers must be held accountable to the law. In fact, if the government wants to show us that Aarto can work, then implementing it on public transport would be the perfect way to start. Let's see if the demerit-based system will reduce accidents and deaths caused by bus and taxi drivers. It will be a lot easier to administer a system with fewer drivers, and it will help work out all the bugs. And if you can get it to work, then expand it to the rest of the population. But the problem is, the ANC will not address any of these things before they implement Aarto, because that would involve dismantling the entire system of corruption. They won't do away with cadre deployment and the corruption that facilitates, and they won't deal with the corruption they have installed in law enforcement, and they certainly won't challenge the powerful taxi unions whose political support they need. Following the recent Constitutional Court ruling, Aarto will become law. My hope is that it will not be until after the next election, and that by then South Africans will have given the ANC their final demerit and taken away their license to abuse us. But let me know in the comments what you think about Aarto. And please like and subscribe and share this video, and let's get South Africa talking.